introduce you to one of the most famous Nepo babies of the 1400s. And if you're interested in history, then why not follow along? This fellow behind me is Juan, also known as Giovanni Borgia. He was the second child of Pope Alexander VI and his mistress Venosa de Catanei. Giovanni's equally famous siblings include Lucrezia and Cesare Borgia, a man who famously inspired Niccolo Machiavelli to write The Prince. Now, it is widely agreed amongst historians that Giovanni was his father's favourite child. As a result, in 1488, it was Giovanni and not Cesare who became the Duke of Gandia upon the death of their elder brother Pier Luigi. Giovanni would go on to marry a woman named Maria Enriquez, cousin of King Ferdinand II of Aragon. Now, the thing about Giovanni is that he was about as useful as this guy, George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence. Funnily enough, George and Giovanni are both played by the same actor, David Oak, and they are also both murdered. We'll get to that. Upon Giovanni's return to Italy in 1496, Giovanni was entrusted with a campaign against the powerful Orsini family. Now, a thing about the Orsini, pretty much like everyone else, they hated the Borgias, and when King Charles VIII invaded Italy in the 1490s, they sided with him against the Pope. The campaign against the Orsini was initially successful. However, this was largely due to the expertise of a condottiere named Guido Baldo de Montefeltro. However, this campaign was being conducted in the winter, which meant the weather conditions were extremely harsh on the soldiers. Montefeltro was injured in battle. Command largely fell to Borgia, and under his command, they began to suffer heavy military defeats. By February of 1497, the Pope had no choice but to sue for peace. The thing about Giovanni is that he isn't best remembered for his life, but for how he died. On the night of the 14th of June, 1497, Giovanni attended a family dinner at his mother's house in Rome. Giovanni and his brother Cesare, who at this time was a cardinal, left the dinner together. Their final destination was meant to be the papal palace, but as they approached the palace of Ascanio Sforza, Duke supposedly told his brother that they should go their separate ways because he was going to find entertainment elsewhere, aka he was going to look for a lady of the night. At this point, Giovanni dismissed his retinue, told his servant to wait for him until 8 o'clock, and if he hadn't returned, to just return to the papal palace. He then departed into the night with a man wearing a mask. To this day, we do not know the identity of the man who was wearing the mask, but he had been with Giovanni all evening. Giovanni would never be seen alive again. Next morning, Giovanni's horse returned to the papal palace with one of its stirrups cut. The servant who had remained behind to wait for him was found fatally wounded. It was eventually on the 16th of June that Giovanni's body was pulled from the Tiber. Actually, the Pope was devastated. The identity of Giovanni's killer was never discovered. However, there are two main suspects. First being the Orsinis, who wanted to exact revenge against the Borgias for the death of Virginio Orsini. The second and most famous candidate is Giovanni's brother, Cesare Borgia. Given his later actions, I do think there is a very good chance that it was Cesare who murdered his brother.